So many managers feel stuck, overwhelmed by tasks, managing day-to-day operations, and simply struggling to keep up. But what if they could be more than just managers? What if they could become truly inspiring leaders? Now, Andre, I know that you work with managers to do exactly that, to make that transition from being a manager, really leading and being an inspiring leader. And in fact, you were just sharing with me a conversation you were having with one of your clients just the past couple of days. So maybe you could share that and walk us through what that conversation was like.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Yes, it is, isn't it? We talk about this difference between being a manager and being a leader. It's like two sides of a coin, if we can use that metaphor. But I did have this conversation with one of my coaching clients, and we came to the end of our coaching arrangement, and I was giving this client of mine some feedback. So we went through this interesting conversation, and it was very revealing to the client as well as to me as we went through this, about how can he be a more inspiring leader, because he's a pretty good manager. You know, he'd been put in the role because he delivered, he'd been doing things right, but there was something that he just wasn't quite hitting. So we had this conversation, Darren, about managing and leading. And it kind of links a lot into what you and me talk about in our Leadership Accelerator program. So the first part of it was this distance between, being a manager or an authority about something towards being a leader. And the manager talks about me, the manager talks about I, the leader talks about we. We talk about going from me to we in our Leadership Accelerator. And it sounds quite simple, but yet when you look underneath the layers, individual leaders still see themselves as me, my team, my issues, my results, rather than our team, our issues, our results. And that was one of the big ahas.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems like a short distance, but it can be a seismic shift for some people. When they talk about natural leaders, some people do naturally think about the we as opposed to the me. That's where that natural comes in. But it, of course, can be learned. It's a narrative that's playing in your head, and it's a way of looking at it. But for some people, it is a significant mindset shift. And that is where careers will plateau if they can't make that shift.
Yes, spot on. The second thing we talked about was time and relationships. So we talk about spending time with others, and managers often see themselves, management by walking around or whatever you want to call it, about spending time with others. And the shift to leadership is investing time with others. So we move from spending to investing. If you think about how you go about your own resources, sometimes you spend, sometimes you invest. Managers spend, leaders invest in building those relationships.
What you invest in is what you get a return on. Rarely do you get a return on your spending, you get a return on your investing.
The third thing we talked about was focus. So a good manager has eyes on the bottom line, the here and now, the issues that are going on. A leader also has eyes on the horizon. What's coming up? They're looking a little bit further ahead than the issues I have today. We're so caught up, so tied up in all of the things that are happening right now. It tends to draw us away from looking at the horizon.
Absolutely. Often we'll find that managers can be very caught in the tactical and transactional, whereas leaders are about the strategic and the relational, and building long-term relations, thinking strategic. Whereas when you're in that manager mode, again, it can be very limited in that scope.
And the other thing, which was really interesting, is often there is, particularly if you're an authority or an expert, which is where a lot of first-time leaders come from, and even senior leaders as well, is someone who knows it all, an authority on something, to someone who asks questions, remains curious. There's this Harvard professor called Howard Ross. He talks about the more you know, the less you learn. Because as soon as you see yourself as being an authority, you switch off the learning piece in your head. So it's this whole notion that you still got to remain curious. Yes. And a good leader is curious. They ask questions. Howard Ross calls it constructive uncertainty, and it's an interesting word. Essentially what it means is sometimes the more you think you know, the less you open up yourself to learning. And that's a big shift, and something I've learned as well recently.
I often talk about that first phase of your career by being the smartest in the room and hopefully elegantly demonstrating that, not abrasively demonstrating that. And as you move into the inspiring leader role, you need to move from smartest in the room to the most collaborative in the room, the most curious in the room. And that needs to become a real focus, and not proving that you're the best at it, but leading your team to be the best at it within the context of your organization.
Yes, very much so. And the other thing we talked about was the focus, which was very much around getting things done. So yes, you do need to get things done. You do need to show outcomes and output. But a good leader is also about aligning people, right? Making sure that time is spent so that people are aligned. So it's away from task and into task plus relationship. And it's interesting because when a new leader comes in, or even an experienced leader, they're so focused on what has to happen. And you and me have seen so many of these in our experience. Whereas the effort that goes into aligning people and spending time aligning people is not enough. And a good leader invests time in aligning. There's that invest word again.
Fantastic. It becomes so very, very important, that investment and the alignment. Chief Commercial Officer of an organization I'm working with, we were talking about his frustration not being able to spend more time with his people. And so as we talk through it, again, using that language is helping him to understand he has invested in the right places because they all know he has their back, right? And so he's built a very high trust culture within his team because he's invested in the right parts of the relationship and in the right ways. He can flex a little bit because he's established that through the investing in the relationships with his people.
There's that word again. Yeah, absolutely. And finally, the last thing in this particular feedback conversation about the shift from being a manager to being a leader, or an authority to being a leader, was this notion of control. Of course, we want people to feel accountable, but really the shift to being a leader moves away from control to motivate and inspiring. And of course, we know that, Darren, because we talk about how we do that by creating the right climate in the team so that people feel they want to be part of this organization. The motivation and inspiration comes from the climate largely, rather than someone jumping up there and slamming the desk and giving the impassioned speech at the front of the room. That has a spike, but the long-term motivation inspiring comes from climate. And a lot of people don't get that. They still focus on the control, which is actually quite the opposite effect on creating a positive climate.
Yeah, absolutely does. In the Leader Accelerate program, we address that concept in a number of areas. One of them being creating buy-in, right? Getting people to buy into your ideas or your vision. And that very clearly is, it's not an event, it's a process. And that's exactly why we created the Leader Accelerate program, is to help senior leaders who are very often time poor and find it hard to invest that developmental time with their people because they've got so many other areas that they need to address, whether they're a business leader, or L&D leader, HR leader. Is that we created this tool to help them invest time wisely with their people by having a systematic approach to helping managers turn into really inspiring leaders and being able to really add value to their organizations and to their teams.
The easy thing to do is download our ebook, the 17 strategies. And as you look through those 17 strategies, they are very much about moving from being a manager or authority to being a leader. So download the book, share it with people in your organization. Use it yourself. You might be coaching some of your managers and leaders in your organization. It's a great tool to help you think about some of those coaching elements.
Absolutely. So download below, and we'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks, André.